This is the Roaring Meg waterfall, and it's just below Cooktown, right in the heart of the rainforest country. You can tell why it's called the Roaring Meg. And in wet season time, when it's in full swing, all this rock surface is covered with water, and it races away, and it drops about 3,000 feet. That's about 1,000 metres in funny talk, right down to the coastline. Way back in the olden days, early 20s and that period, when the first original tin scratchers and tin miners came up here, they used this water and the runoff from it to wash their tin. They dig channels all the way around the mountainside and use and channel the water to wash out the tin.
The early tin miners who came into this scrub country were looking for riches. Life would have been pretty unpleasant when they lived here. It was wet all the time, and of course they had this great big canopy which cut out most of the sunlight. The Aboriginals, on the other hand, had come to grips with this environment. They knew by looking around the place what they could find to get themselves the food that they needed and of course the water that they needed. That's quite a contrast to what those early tin miners found. They were quite out of their element and out of their depth, but even today, when we go back into the scrub, we can find the remains of their occupation in that country.
I reckon these tin scratcher blokes that were up here, they would have had to cart all this sort of stuff from Bloomfield. They probably carted it on their backs or maybe even used pack horses. Also had to cart all their food. But they probably didn't realise that, there we go, right outside their front door, they had these little rainforest figs growing, and you can eat them, they're edible. They did make some attempt to grow local foods, and always around tin huts like this, you're likely to find banana bushes, and there's one over there with bananas on it. Pretty scruffy looking one, but it's worthwhile. Apart from banana bushes, you'll also find chilies. Look at these little fellas. They use the chilies to chuck into the stew, just to flavour the meat a bit. And they really have a bit of a bite to them. They're hot. I reckon they'd keep you regular though. You get a real idea of how tough the life was for those early miners when you look around a clearing like this. All of the scrub that once grew here had to be cut away, and all of that work was done by hand. Looking around the place, I can't see any other food trees around the joint. What I can see are these gullies here. And these gullies carried the water for the tin miners from the Roaring Meg way back in the scrub line, maybe 2 or 3 kilometres. You've got to be a bit careful because the ferns that are growing out of them disguise the depth. And when you get down to gullies like this one here, this is the master gully. It looks, oh crikey, you'd lose yourself down there. Looks to be about 5 foot deep. Hang on. Oh. And it is. Crikey. It's just full of ferns and weeds. And I would have hate to have had to work to dig it out. It's only about 1 foot wide and very cramped. Hello. Somebody else has been in here.
That's a python skin. Obviously shedding his skin down here. There's a bit more of it. I think I better get out of here. This is the northern edge of what was once called the Big Scrub. Now, it was called the Big Scrub because it went all the way back south, about 450 kilometres, right back as far as Townsville. These days, it's broken up into pockets, and that's occurred because of farming and settlement. This trip will take me almost to the very top of Cape York Peninsula, looking for Bushtucker. Of course, to survive in any environment, you need more than food. You've also got to have water and, of course, shelter. But water around here in a rainforest environment is not really very difficult to find. In fact, during the wet season, I wouldn't be able to drive through here because all of these creeks would be running a banker. Way back in the beginning, when I first started to research Bushtucker, I started in this environment, the rainforest. And the reason for that was the fact that I was most familiar with this sort of country. When I was a bit of a kid, I grew up to the south of here, in rainforest country, so I knew all about it. Well, I thought I did at the time anyway. A few years later, that background and that information held me in good stead, because the army sent me off to Vietnam. Looking at Bushtucker in an environment like this is not as difficult as you might imagine, because once you look around a bit and look into the forest instead of at it, there's tucker everywhere. See these? They're candle nuts, and you can find them lying on the floor all around this whole area. They're very common in the rainforest. You can eat these as well, and they taste absolutely superb. I'll break one open and show you. Oh, killed that one. There it is. That white pulp tastes very, very similar to macadamia nut. They can also be used back in the campfire, so I'll take some back and use these tonight back at camp. I met a fellow one time who told me about these things. Well, I didn't actually meet him. He'd been dead about 100 years now, but I read his diary anyway. And what he reckoned was that when he was working in the scrub country, he could track the Aboriginal movement because of the seeds out of these things. What they'd do is open them up, chew them up, get a bit of a taste of them, and then spit them out. And by all the spittings all around the place, you could see where the Aboriginals were moving. There's a fellow called Christy Palmerston. Not only can you eat the seeds though, you can get into the root system. And that's worthwhile because this is the ginger plant, and it's a great food additive and food flavouring. Rocky ground, ginger likes rocks. There we go. There it is. Whew. Make that old bit off. That's the ginger root itself. Tuck that away. That's what you're after. It's great for putting in your tucker. Flavours up your fish or whatever you got on. And it lasts for weeks, so you can carry it with you. Just exactly how Aboriginal people worked out what you could eat and what you couldn't is very, very difficult to judge. Maybe they used a method of trial and error over many, many years. One thing's for sure though, here in the scrub country, looks of a plant or food can be very deceptive. Now here's something you've got to look out for in the scrub country. This is the stinging tree. And out of all the products you can find in the rainforest here, this one has got to be the worst. Because if you touch the leaves or the branches or the twigs, you get very, very severely stung. And that sting, it doesn't last just a day or an hour, it lasts for weeks and sometimes months. At this time of year, it got this fruit on it. It looks a little bit like mulberries or something like that. In fact, you can eat them, but I reckon that the trauma of trying to get at them and the chances of being stung are too much, so I leave them alone. If you look very closely at this leaf here, you can see all these fine hairs just sticking up. Those hairs are in fact hollow, and they've got a slight injection that they give you once they stick into you. Right, they're all over the surface there, both the top surface and underneath. I reckon it's too dangerous to play around with myself. As you travel north, it's not long before the rainforest begins to peter out, and then quite suddenly, right on the edge of the scrub country, you come across this amazing rock formation, the mysterious and sinister Black Mountain. Geologists reckon the mountain was created by volcanic activity, a great pile of black rock. It looks almost like an enormous slag heap. Aboriginal people have got a legend for it. They reckon that the Dreamtime spirits piled up these rocks, stacking them right up, one on top of the other, all in readiness for man's arrival. That's granite. Look at that. These are the Black Mountains just near Cooktown. And it's composed of all these ginormous big granite boulders, all sitting stacked one on top of the other. In fact, you've got to be careful when you're climbing up here, because it's got holes and caverns and caves all around the place, and you can fall down as easy as anything. There's some stories round that a few whitefellas that came up here and tried to explore in here never came out again. Principally policemen and people running from the police. The problem is they crawl in underneath, get lost, can't see any daylight, and can't find their way out again. Aboriginals had similar sorts of stories. One goes that there's a whole tribe came through here at one time, crawled in here to hide, and only half them manage to find their way out. They also tell us that on a windy day, you can hear them calling out, trying to find their way out again. It'll take me 2 days to drive up north to a place called Iron Range, and up there we've got the second major rainforest patch in North Queensland. To get there, I've got to cross this open savanna, this dry country, and most of Cape York area is made up of this sort of environment. It looks pretty harsh, and in fact, some of the early explorers perished in this country. This road didn't exist 20 years ago, and it's only in more recent times that roads have begun to appear. There's talk that one day they'll put in a bitumen road, but I'm pretty happy the way things are now. This is Iron Range, and there's a pretty good reason for calling it that. They found minerals here. Those minerals didn't prove to be economical, and so far, no mining's gone on here. And it remains a very good natural rainforest. One of the first requirements in the scrub country is shelter. And if you get stuck out here without a tent, or as we call it in the army, a hoochie, you can knock one up out of the scrub itself. It's a technique that Aboriginal people perfected. This stuff here is that lawyer vine. And what they do with that is stick it in the ground like that, and then over this side here, and make a whole bunch of rafters out of this stuff. Like this. These days, white people use the same lawyer vine for making the cane furniture. A few years ago, it was used in schools all over Australia for giving you a flogging. I remember it well. Yeah, they'd get the structure up like that. Then they'd perhaps weave a few things in and out of the frames. Put another one there just to make sure that it works. You can see it's got a whole igloo sort of effect to it. And they'd weave around some rafters, that's pretty rough. Tie it in there a little bit. I'll just sit it there for the moment. And then they'd use the banana leaves to put the covering over the whole thing. And for a one-night stand, it was pretty good. Did the job. You'd be flat out finding an unattractive rainforest stream, even though they're always very, very shallow. But it's surprising what you can find in the water. It could be eels, or fish, or even turtle. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, you can even get some yabbies. One way you can catch a yabby is by using raw meat just like this. What you do is put the meat into an old leaf, just bind him up, turn him over a bit, make him tight, then bung it in the middle of a bit of grass like that. Just close him up tight like that. I was shown this by an Aboriginal bloke a few years ago. And you get a bunch of sticks like that, just place them around the outside. They help keep the whole thing together a bit. And the principle is that the yabby crawls up inside here and gets caught. And when you pull it out, that's a bit big. When you pull it out, that's going to weigh it down when I put it in the water, by the way. When you pull it out, the yabby can't escape the trap quickly enough, and so he's caught in there. Once you've got your bundle like that, Just wind him round a bit like this. And tie a knot so it doesn't come to bits. And there's your yabby trap, just like that. And you put him in the water somewhere where you had a bit of root system, because the yabbies hide under the bank in the roots of the trees that go along the edge of the creek. I'm going to put this one in just over here. We'll leave that there for a few hours. Where'd he go? There he is. Up. Oh, see those fellas there? When they get bigger, their mums and dads became tucker in the past. Catch them like that, take them up, cook them, and they provide a feed. Mind you, most snakes that I've eaten, you don't really get that much meat off the body, because what tends to happen is that the cage fills out. This little fella's a harmless little bloke. I'm giving him a bit of a hard time here. The rib cage fills out and takes up all the bulk, and there's not really that much meat on them. We'll just let this bloke go. He wouldn't even be a snack. There he goes. Water snakes like this are quite often found around the waterways, but it's surprising in the scrub country how few animals and birds you actually see. A lot of them are nocturnal. During the day, it's the patterns and the vegetation that capture your eye. Let's have a look what we got here. There. You gotta be. Oh, there's. Oh, hello. There's a lofty in that one. No, there he is there. See him tangled up? There he goes. Steady, steady. You know, because these, that's a bit hot, because these yabbies are related to the saltwater prawn group, they look very similar once they're cooked up. See them? Look exactly the same as the prawn you get out in the ocean, and taste very similar as well. Just going to peel this fella and put him into the pot there, because I got a bit of rice boiling away there. A little bit of protein won't do any harm. He peels just like a normal prawn. There you go, peel off the back just the same. Break him up a bit. Put him in there. Just chop up a couple of little bits of ginger. couple of bits. It's fairly strong tasting ginger, so you don't need all that much of it. And boil that away. There, that looks... Oh yeah, that'll work well. I've also got here some candle nuts, the ones I collected out in the forest floor. And what I've done is thread them, after cracking them open, onto some little bits of wire. Now I'm going to put those candle nuts in the fire and just leave them there for a little bit, somewhere where they can get nice and hot. You see, those nuts are very, very high in energy. I think they're about 2,600 kilojoules. That's a lot when you compare it with something like honey, which is only about 1,400. They're high for one particular reason, and that's the fat content which is contained within the nut. The other business about that fat is the fact that it's flammable. And the old squatters and tin miners and gold scratchers used to get them and do the exact same thing that I'm doing now with them, and then hang them up. There we go. Hang them up around the place as substitutes for candles. So you see, in the scrub country, we've got our tucker and a bit of shelter, and we've even got our own light source. And who could ask for more than that? Keep your boats, give me a four-wheel drive any day. 200 years ago, that Billy Bligh came here, and he landed right over there somewhere, maybe up there too. And he came here in a longboat because Fletcher Christian gave him no option. I reckon his man management wasn't real good. And he came from all the way over there at Tahiti, right across to the Australian coast and bumped it right here. When he arrived here, this island didn't have a name. But after 2 days, when he left, it was called Restoration Island. And the reason for that was that Bligh restored all his food resources and got his water supplies from this island. Bligh reached the island halfway up the east coast of Cape York Peninsula after surviving for 4 weeks in an open longboat with 18 men. And I suppose they couldn't believe their luck when they hit this place. Native fruits, nuts, yams, as well as prolific bird life. An uninhabited island which turned out to be a supermarket. Things haven't changed much, even today. In fact, the black lip oysters were the very first things that Bligh and his men got stuck into.
These are those black lip oysters. And they're pretty large and tough. But gee, they're worthwhile. There's just about a meal in every oyster. Look at this fella here. Bligh was pretty lucky that he landed here because the distribution of these oysters is pretty restricted. There you go. Whoop. Get another one. You can see that all the rocks around here have got these fellas on them. We've also got the old milky oysters over there, but these are the attractive ones because of their size. They're very high in iodine too. And, gee, this one. I've opened some over the years and found a little bit of a pearl shell in some of them. I don't think I'll have that luck today, but I was saying about that iodine. There's one there. Very high in iodine. And if you've got a bit of a foot rot, a bit of tinea, I guess the trick would be to put a whole bunch of these in your boots and walk around. Top stuff. There we go. That's him there. Just cut him away. Where is that? It's hard to imagine what it would have been like for these men, so far away from anything familiar. But when you're hungry, I guess you'll have a go at anything. When you have a look at Bligh's diary and have a bit of a read through it, you can botanically key out some of the species that he ate while he was staying here on restoration. One of them was this fella here. That's the Wongai plum. And it really comes from way up in the Torres Strait. Up there, they've got a bit of a legend for it. They reckon once you eat it, you've always got to keep coming back. And of course, that's what happened to Billy Bligh. He got back to England, they dressed him up as a governor and sent him back out to New South Wales. So I guess they might be right up the top end there. A few years later, maybe 60, a bloke called Kennedy, over there on the mainland just over that way, was having a whole bunch of trouble trying to survive. In the same area where Bligh was having a feast, Edmund Kennedy was facing starvation. In 1848, Kennedy set out to explore from Rockingham Bay to the top of Cape York, and the odds were against him right from the start. The expedition was weighed down with tons of equipment, and this was as far as they got. Kennedy Hill. The going's hard enough here with just a pack on your back, but Kennedy had the works. He started off with 13 men, 27 horses, 3 carts, 100 sheep, and all their supplies. After months of struggle, 10 men finally made it to the top of this hill, still hundreds of miles short of their destination. They were too weak and too scared of the Aboriginals to move into the bush and to look for food. And one by one, they died. I look around here, up this way, that hill there, another one over there, and those hills are all named after people who died in this area on Kennedy's expedition. In fact, there's a creek line over there called Glenny Creek, and that's named after the horse, Glenny. The horse starved to death as well.
This is how my work really started. I always wondered why Kennedy and his men perished, why they died with so much tucker around them. William Bligh managed okay because he landed right in the middle of a supermarket, over there, off the coast. Kennedy, on the other hand, was a couple of miles inland, and he never made any real attempt to bring his men down onto the coastline. Well, it seems the main reason for that was his fear of the Aboriginals, and they were the very people who could have helped him the most. This coastline of Cape York is as remote as ever. Even the Aboriginal people up here now live at a place called Lockhart River, a township with a general store. They don't live off the land, and their traditions are dying. Some of them used to live at the old Lockhart River Mission. It's a remote tropical paradise which has now fallen into decay. It was abandoned in the 60s when the Anglican Church handed over control to the Queensland government. But while the mission itself has died, the land around it is as rich as ever.
You want to have a look around now? Yeah, come on. No worries. Hey, we've got half a mango tree up here now. Which house did you live in, Ozzy?
Right down another end there.
Another end there?
Oh, I live down here, but it's been pulled down now.
Pulled down?
Yeah.
Righto.
Today I'm returning with some of the former residents, people with memories of living off the land here.
So you can use that head off mine if you want him.
I still have one.
Righto. Might have been that
Hobie
mango
was
tree.
brought up here and spent a lot of his life at the mission. Some of them were married here in the church, and for all these older people, coming back here is just like revisiting their childhood.
All right. Righto. Who's Lollywater?
Even the older people feel a bit like strangers here now, but it shouldn't take long for it to all fall back into place.
Just out here for the crayfish.
Yeah. Oh, crayfish now. Yes.
More further.
We might have to go other side. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't know what is tide, what to start going out or coming in.
Oh, a little bit maybe. Might be going out still, eh? Might get him later on this afternoon.
Yeah.
What do you reckon? Camp here, Minnie? Yeah, it'll be all right. What do you reckon, Ozzy? You all right too? Oh, well. Listen, you want some tucker tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring some down. I got some in the car, but I've got to go and get him later on, eh?
Probably go down and fish it.
Hey, go fishing, you reckon? You reckon you catch one? Maybe. Yeah. What colour is crab, Ozzy?
On the sand. It's not.
Sand colour. Sand crab.
Yeah.
What are you going to use him for?
Used to.
Oh, there he is. There he is. But use him for bait or what?
Yes, bait.
Fish bait.
You bite you?
You try to put your finger.
I'm not going to put my...
Oh, no.
He's all right.
Oh, no.
There we go. He does bite too. All this for a little sand crab. Crikey. There we go. The sand crab used for bait. Put him in the billy and save him for later on. Getting much bushtucker around here?
No, no way.
Not even that happy snail or that whelp? Few oysters. Don't do much, eh?
This part sort of behind, eh? Behind on the corner.
Yeah.
Can't see oysters anymore.
Down here. Ah. Too far. Some down here. Gotta watch him, old fella. His feet. Reckon it might be crocodile here? Yeah? There's a completely different rhythm of life here, which an outsider like me just has to adapt to. Each time I come out to these places, it always takes me a few days to adjust. But once I do, it's great. Just slowing down like this gives me time to really observe, because things aren't always what they seem. There's plenty to find here in the mangroves. Things like mud crabs and whelks. Things that the untrained eye would pass by. And that goes for so many things along this entire coastline. Every now and again, when you're walking around the bush country, you can find something that not only Aboriginal people used, but also white people. And this is one of them. Aboriginals had about 4 different uses for these matchbox beans. White fellas only came up with about 1, I think. Just break them open. Oh, they're a bit scungy, that one's had it. One of the main uses they had was to get these nuts, little brown ones from outside of the pod here, and then they'd crack him open, like that. And what they'd get is that white inside. And they'd mash that up, cook it and bake it over a long period of time, and then eat it. They also had some other uses from the same vine and the same pods. This is a bit of bark off the vine that we saw down there a minute ago. And if we fold that up, just a bit like this, round and round, and then give that a bit of a thump, watching the fingers, and then go and wash that in the water. Now this stuff here has got a chemical in it called saponin, and that saponin is related to soap, so that when you wash it in a bowl of water, you get a froth. forming. And you can use it to stun fish. Oh, it's really lathering up well there. Stun fish and collect them and then eat them. Or you can wash it to scrub yourself down, just like you use soap. Whitefellas, of course, didn't twig to any of those uses. The only use they came up with was this fella here. And that's how it got its common name. They'd split one of the pods open, and then inside of that, they'd carry their matches, just like that. They'd join it together with a little hinge at the back here, and then put a little cord round it. And they'd carry that matchbox holder around their necks. Pretty neat. The string I've got here tying it all together, including the hinge at the back, is all, again, bush string made from this stuff here, the original bark. This tree here has got more common names than it can handle. I think it's got the Indian almond, the Pacific almond, the tropical almond and the sea almond. Doesn't matter. Its true name's Terminalia catappa. And he's very, very common along the east coast of Cape York. But you don't look up in the tree if you want to get the almonds off him. What you've got to do is look down on the ground, because that's where they fall and that's where you'll find them. When you're looking for these almonds around the forest floor, you've got to be pretty quick about it, because if you're not, and you're a bit slow, the rats come in and eat out the whole thing. And what you end up with is something like that, just a husky bit of rubbish. So I'll look around here, there's a couple good ones, that's a good one. A couple more. That one's no good. That one's okay. We'll just go and find ourselves a rock and crack that open. Watch your fingers when you're cracking these things, because there we go. They can be a little bit tough to get open. Ah, there's the almond in there, that little fawny coloured looking thing, just there. I'll just get him out, quite long. They've got a taste on them, exactly the same as the one you get out of the shop. And the nutritional value on these, I think it's about 2,400 kilojoules, which rates at about 3 times that of beef steak from an energy point of view. It's really good food. Of course, on the coastal fringe, the best place to find food is down by the water. Things like oysters and shellfish, and if you're lucky, there might even be the odd coconut lying around. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, the coconut trees weren't even here in Bligh and Kennedy's day. These coconuts shouldn't really be opened this way, because these are the green ones. And you don't normally open a green coconut like I'm doing this, but I just did it because it'll give you some idea of the structure of the nut. That's the outside husk, and there's the inside nut, and that's the part we're after. Of course, coconuts weren't always to be found along the coastline here. If we go back to old Bligh's diary, he says over there in Restoration that he looked along the coastline, but he could find no nuts anywhere. And there's a good reason for that. What used to happen was when the coconuts were washed ashore, possibly from New Guinea or the Solomons or wherever they came from, the Aboriginals would come down the beach, grab hold of the nuts and eat them straight away, long before they ever germinated up here along the coastline. These coconuts you see here were in fact planted by the missionaries who established the old Lockhart River Mission. I'll just get into this nut a bit more, because get rid of that rubbish, that stuff too. I think I might chop this with a machete, because there's a point inside here to be made, and it's the juice. The juice in this nut is in fact quite sterile. And over in the Solomons today, they're using that juice in there for straight intravenous drip. See if I can cut this nut because they're fairly, ooh, there we go, fairly tight. Butchered that. There we go. There's all the milk in it now. Machete. You can see the milk out there now. Delightful stuff. I reckon you could probably ferment it too. The obvious thing to eat here is the seafood. It's just fantastic what you can find here. There are literally hundreds of varieties of edible fish. Fish like trevally and red emperor and trout. And what I think's the best prize of all, crayfish. This fella here is the painted cray, and you can tell why he's got that name. He's kicking a bit at times. All that bright blue colour on the back, tremendous. And this is the tail here. This has got all the meat in it. I'll just show you underneath. Oh, careful. There's the meat there. You can see it across the abdomen. They're very, very common around this part of the coastline, and you've got to dive for them, of course, to capture them. The problem is, of course, that when you capture them, they kick and squeal literally, because of these feelers here. And that squeal attracts the sharks. So I reckon I'll get out while I'm ahead and leave it at 1. The one thing I've learned over all the years that I've been doing this work is that you've got to roll with the country. You've got to be part of it. You've got to fit into it. Early exploration in Australia was one of almost a military campaign. The individuals took on the exploration with an aggression, an arrogance. You can see that by the equipment they took and their approach to going across the land. It was one of going out campaigning and conquering. There's no way you can conquer this country. You've got to fit in with it. Aboriginal people have taught me these lessons which have stood me in good stead, lessons that I now appreciate and understand, and I can understand why they themselves operate the way they do. Bobby? Straight in like that? Like that way? Or other way? That way? That looks pretty good. We'll give him 5 or 6, 10 minutes maybe. Pull him out and eat him, eh?
A bit longer, that one, eh?
Yeah. All right. We're going to
Still swimming, eh?
get a little bit longer than that one. Okay. When Bligh was over here on Restoration Island, of course, he didn't realise that these blacklip oysters, which he laboured over on the rocks, and I did the other day as well, could be opened in a very, very easy manner. And that's simply by putting them on the hot coals of the fire, just like that. In a survival situation, which is what Bligh was in at the time, the expenditure of energy is extremely important. By putting on the hot coals like that, the heat makes the oyster open right up within a couple of minutes. Thereby, you are saving energy. And that, of course, is very important when you're trying to survive. It's hard to imagine, just sitting here now, that that sort of thing could ever matter. But when you really are struggling to survive, that kind of knowledge could save your life. I'd heard about the plane crash at Moonlight Creek. It happened back in '42, so it's surprising to find the remaining wreckage in pretty good condition. There are still clues to be found here that are the start of an amazing survival story. This is one of those old American warbirds. It was originally called a Liberator bomber. It took off from Iron Range airstrip right up in the Cape York area, flew up a whole bunch of others to do a bombing raid up in New Guinea. On its way back it got lost and it ended up running out of fuel just here, right in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Out of the whole crash, there are only 6 blokes who survived it. 2 of them walked that way to Escott Station and got rescued, and the other 4, they made a disastrous decision. They went west. Out of that 4, only 1 lived, but he lived for 5 months. Now this part of the world here, in Australia, is very stark, because the area we're talking about is right here in the Gulf of Carpentaria, right on the Northern Territory border. And to survive around here, you've really got to keep your eyes open because food and water is very scarce. The 4 airmen were walking west to nowhere. They were strangers in a totally foreign landscape. The navigation equipment on their aircraft had broken down, so they had no idea where they were or where they were heading. Over the next few months, they would have to put up with extreme weather conditions. The humidity and monsoonal rain of the wet, plus scorching 40-degree heat. The only gear they had with them was some matches, a knife, 1 fish hook, and a few bars of chocolate. They lived on berries, bush passion fruit, melons, and the odd snake and a few frogs. But like most Australians, they weren't really sure what they could eat out here. The little bit of food they found just wasn't enough. In the wet, rivers became a major problem. They turned into fast-flowing torrents. During one difficult crossing, one of the men was swept away and drowned. He was simply too weak to make it. What the rest of them never realised was that there was a food source right on the riverbank. It grows all along the rivers and creeks up here in the north, the pandanus. Up here, we've got the little terminal bud at the end of the branch here. And you can get at that just by peeling back the leaves. Just chop a few away, because right in the middle of this is a meal. There we go. And that's what you can eat in there. Same as the palm, it's got that cabbagey type taste. Because really what you're eating is the white base of the leaves. Dig a bit of him out. It's not too bad. Plenty of fibre. Certainly keep you alive. If you're trying to survive out here, there's one bushtucker you should try and avoid, and that's this fella here. Because this is the cycad, which is extremely poisonous. But Aboriginal people found a way you could eat him. Because these cycads contain a big mob of toxins, Aboriginals found a way that they could get rid of them by leaching them in running water. You just break this old one open so you can see what's inside. There it is there. You get quite a bit of nut for your money. Now, after about 10 days of pounding and washing and baking and boiling and all the rest of it, they'd then make a johnny cake out of it and eat it. But we've tested these things and we find that they still, after all that treatment, contain a big lot of toxins. Even when they are finished and they're baked up, they've got a taste which is about the same as wet cardboard. And I think the nutritional value is something similar. The cycad palm is one of the most primitive plants on Earth, and it's a good example of how much knowledge you need to live off this country. That's why the survivors of the plane crash at Moonlight Creek were in such a desperate situation. They knew nothing about Bushtucker. They could find plenty of water, but very little food. After 3 months, the 3 remaining airmen arrived at a billabong, but they had no idea of the food that was there. Most of the billabongs in Northern Australia are pretty much the same. And at that time of year when they were here, it was wet season. So all of this dead grass here would have been green and upstanding and producing little edible nuts underneath the mud. In fact, that stuff there is called water chestnut and you can eat it. As well as that, they would have gotten these things here, which are little mud mussels. Cook them up and eat them as well. Out here, they've got the water lilies. And even when they're not producing bulbs, which are edible, you can eat the young leaves and the shoots and the whole lot. If only they'd known that, they could have survived. Incredibly, one of the Americans did survive. He hung on for 141 days before he was found by an Aboriginal stockman. They took away the bodies of his two mates, who died of starvation, surrounded by food. The Moonlight Creek tragedy highlights our need to know more about the bush. That's why I spend most of my time travelling across Northern Australia, getting more information on bush survival. Moving inland to the south, the landscape changes. Suddenly, you find yourself right on the edge of the arid zone. I've never catalogued Bushtucker in this part of the Gulf country before, so to me, it's all new territory. At the end of a long, tiring day, travelling through the dry country, it's great to find a campsite like this. After the heat and the dust, it's almost as if nature's decided to play a bit of a trick. It's a perfect spot for a base camp for the next few days' work. I thought I had this place to myself, but I'm wrong. The billabong and my campsite are absolutely swarming with Bufo marinus, the dreaded cane toad. It's an introduced species which is now completely out of control. Two years ago, cane toads didn't exist in the territory, but they've moved across the Queensland border and they're going to continue moving, I'd reckon. Every creek, every billabong, every waterway is now infested with these things. They're a bit of a problem around here because the most popular bush tucker with Aboriginal people is the goanna. And the old goanna, when he sees that cane toad, he thinks it's Christmas. And he eats him, and because the cane toad's poisonous, the old goanna dies. And today, you're flat out finding a goanna in this country. You wouldn't want to eat the toad either, because he's got two poisonous sacs on the back of his neck, and that'd do you a great deal of damage. This is the land of the Wanya and the Garawa tribes. In 1986, they were granted freehold title to their land by the federal government. 11,000 square kilometres of spectacular country, which is dominated by the escarpment they call China Wall. Small groups of Aboriginals have moved back to their tribal land to set up outstations. Dry Creek settlement sits at the base of China Wall. It's a small community, maybe 20 or 30 people. The rules are pretty strict. No alcohol's allowed here. They've set up their own store, and it provides most of the food. Even so, Bushtucker still has a role to play, particularly amongst the older people.
Them trees like that, see? All them trees.
Oh, yeah. Got him?
Yeah, that's him over there.
Yeah. What do you use him for?
Well, that's one that medicine, boil him up, and another one there, they get that yellow flower.
Tommy George is the community leader here,
He cooked then, you know.
and he still knows a lot about Bushtucker and bush medicine.
Which one? This grey one here, grey leaf?
Yeah. Just a leaf?
Yeah, you got a fruit now. See that fruit there when he's yellow?
Oh, yeah.
He'll be right to eat it when he's yellow.
When he gets all yellow all over?
Yeah.
Unlike bush foods, bush medicines are generally available throughout the year.
And the other one there, that medicine use.
With this emu apple?
Emu apple, yeah.
The bark of the emu apple can be mashed up and used as a poultice to heal cuts and sores. And growing right alongside, there's even a gum you can eat.
You eat gum out of this one, no matter what time when they're here.
Cut him and get the gum out?
Yeah.
Oh.
You go along the road.
You just eat him?
Yeah,
just eat him straight up?
Yeah, eat it straight up like that.
Anytime?
Anytime.
What do you call that one?
Yellow jack.
Unfortunately, there aren't many Aboriginals with this sort of expert knowledge today. The information's no longer as vital as it once was, especially to younger people who've been brought up on food from the store. So if I'm going to put together a detailed survival map of this area, I really depend on people like Tommy George and this community. What we got here is that Doomadgee map, right? And they've got all that Doomadgee country, Doomadgee Mission, Nicholson River, all that area. But on the back of him, we put a photograph of the Bushtucker on him, right? So we've already got some of them for this area, but we've still got a lot to do because we want to fill in the whole lot of that map with Nicholson River Tucker on him. And you'll probably see some of those ones there, you might know him, eh? An important part of this project is to prepare maps like this for Northern Australia. My army mates call them snack maps. On the back of each one, you'll find all the information you need about the Bushtucker in the area. Tommy suggested we go bush for the day so that he could show me some more of the local food. It was a good excuse for a day's outing for the kids as well. For the kids, the main attraction of the day is the Billabong, a place called Crocodile Hole. In the hills behind the Billabong, Tommy knows a place where he can find a very special bushtucker. Native honey, or sugar bag as it's called.
You're going to go up there, see?
Yeah.
See, I part of that hill over there.
Right up those rocks.
Yeah, that's what that honey over there.
In the rock.
Yeah.
Oh, we need a pick. The native bee doesn't have a sting, and he looks like a little fly, a little bush fly just kicking around the place. Most often you find the hives in the middle of trees and old trunks and things like that. In this case here, we've got him under a rock, and that's pretty unusual. In fact, I've only seen it a couple of times before in a rock shelf like this.
Here we go.
It's worth the effort to dig out the honey, because once you've discovered the hive, you can keep coming back to it. Later on, when the bees have restocked it, maybe in a year or so. The Aboriginals keep coming back, because this is one of their favourite foods.
How often you get him up here, Tom?
Oh, I come around here when I want him, you know.
Ooh, there's a lump. Look at that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
You want him?
Yeah, I want him.
Here we go.
The energy value of sugar bag is extremely high, around about 1800 kilojoules. Now that's quite a bit more than the energy value of honey you get out of the supermarket, which rates at about 1300 kilojoules.
Got a bit here, Tom.
All right.
Give me.
Oh,
There you go.
good. Thank you. Big mob there.
Yeah. Big mob.
I love some more.
Like some more. Got that egg with him.
Yeah.
Here you go, fella.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a bushtucker.
Sugar bag is the best bushtucker you can get. But you've got to work for it. There's more here, mate.
Oh, good.
There you go.
In the past, the chewed up beeswax was used as a glue or a putty, handy for making spears and woomeras. Nothing gets wasted in the bush. Back at the Billabong, the boys have been getting some bushtucker of their own, a freshwater crocodile.
He might be just a bit dead.
This is only a small one. They can grow up to about 2.5 metres. Unlike the saltwater crocodile, these fellas are fairly harmless and timid. Still, I wouldn't try and pat one. They could give you a nasty nip.
You reckon cook him up, Tom?
In the shallow water holes, they're quite common, and they're very easy to spear.
I'm not frightened of it. I'm not frightened of him.
What part do you eat in, the tail?
Yeah, no, up here along the back and along and on the side.
Yeah.
On the head there.
Good tucker?
Yeah.
It's just as well there's only freshwater crocodiles in here, because in this heat, I reckon there's only one place to be.
What's the water like, all right?
Yeah.
Oh, I was coming in with you. Out here, Waterholes of any size are few and far between. Water's scarce at the best of times, but sometimes you can find it in the most unlikely places.
You'd expect to find water in country like this, probably down in that low country around the creek lines. But occasionally, just very occasionally, you can find it up here in the high ground, the ridge lines, places like this. Because sometimes you can come across these sort of things. These are what you call native wells. And what they are is holes in the ground, sometimes bulging out underneath, which collect water and other stuff. And these wells, when the rains come, act as a catchment, and all the water goes down in there. This one here is got quite a bit of moisture in him. And if you're trying to survive, that's going to be pretty important. Cover him up again with a rock so that the sun doesn't evaporate the water off.
Water wells to Aboriginal people were extremely important. The information on where they were to be found was passed on from one generation to the next. It's amazing how a trickle of water can create a little oasis in this dry country. There's a great spot pretty close to Dry Creek where you could almost kid yourself you're in the rainforest.
Where the water coming from, Tommy?
Yeah, the water coming from up there.
So that's the hill there.
Yeah,
We got a billabong up there.
yeah, billabong up there. That's what the water running down.
Water has always been the key to survival, and there's water here all year round. So this is a special place for Tommy's people.
There's another one over here, we're going to have a drink, you know?
Righto.
Right, we're gonna
Coming out of the ground, that one.
Yeah, we want to have a drink here?
Yeah, right. Bit of shower, you?
Yeah.
You want it?
Yeah.
You coming out of that rock up there, Tommy?
Yeah. There's them fig tree around here. There's one up there, another one over here.
What time do you reckon we get in?
Oh, you get him about wet time, you know?
Yeah, Christmas time.
Yeah, Christmas time you get him.
Cluster figs are found all over the north, and they're pretty good eating. Nice and sweet. These won't be ready for at least another month. Of course, there are some foods that you can eat at any time of the year. A good emergency standby is the cabbage tree palm.
You know, he's a bit young.
These palms are unusual for this part of the world, but they're growing here because of the water.
Well, we can have a look, eh?
All right.
And cut him up?
Yep, why not? I've got a photo. You can cut him up.
All right.
The old cabbage tree palm is a pretty useful plant. The leaves can be used for thatching, and the trunk as a compress to relieve backache. And if you cook it up, it's supposed to be pretty good for sore throats.
You can do that, see? You can cut only one side of it.
Timber country.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Kakadu way. I got this one here, big tall one, skinny one.
Yeah, you get a lot of this on Man Creek along Burketown.
Breakdown way.
Yeah, in the Burketown way along the Gregory River.
What, a little short one or a tall, skinny one?
Big, tall one.
Right down the heart.
Yeah, down to the heart.
Top him right here. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that tucker now, see?
Right, that one there.
Yeah. More down here, see?
The cabbage tree palm, like every other bush food, has its own nutritional value. And that's why I take samples for scientific testing.
You want to cut him off a bit and we put him in here?
Yeah.
But I guess it might seem slightly strange that I'm doing 20th century analysis of a bushtucker that Aboriginals have been living on for 40,000 years.
Yeah, filling right up.
You should have a bigger bottle, eh?
You reckon I need a bigger one? You got too much.
Yeah, you got too much, eh?
Push in there. Yeah, put a cap.
Still, as anyone will tell you, the final test of any food is in the eating.
Hey. You want to try 'em?
Yeah, too right.
And of course, in the right company.
That's all right, isn't
Yeah. Bushtucker.
it? Yeah. Not bad at
That's
all.
where we live on this one out here.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I thought you lived on the tin ducket in the store.
Oh, that's one. You know what come down here now? Bushtucker.
Yeah?
This is Bushtucker.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Good to
You
meet
got a lot of them here. Yeah, you want more? You want another piece?
Yeah. All right. Try.
I'll have one too.
You got one too.
Good?
Yeah, too right. Too right. Got a good one in the middle there.
Yeah, that's good one in the middle. You want a bit more?
Yeah.
All right.
The one?
Yeah.
The soft one?
Yeah. Jingo, you like this bushtucker here?
Yeah. Pretty soft, that one. Right in the middle.
Yeah. All right?
All right, all right.
Yeah, cut him up here. You want a bit more?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Right.
Yeah, no more.
A little bit in the middle there.
Yeah, a little bit more.
Soft one.
Yeah.
Right now, we're right in the middle of the dry season, and all the waterways have shrunk right up. What that means is that all the animals and the bird life concentrate right on those waterways, and that's what's happening here at the moment. Of course, in traditional times, Aboriginal people would have to wander around from one waterway to another. Consequently, they were fairly nomadic, chasing game and chasing the animals and the food. These days, of course, they don't do that anymore. What they do today is they live in communities like Aurukun.
Despite an obvious change in lifestyle, the people of Aurukun, here in far north Queensland, have managed to hold on to many of their tribal traditions. And hidden away in this community, there's still just so much knowledge. Two axes. Maybe you make that spear here last time?
Huh?
You make that spear here last time,
Yeah.
too.
Righto, fellas, just dump your gear over there. Put it down over there for a bit, eh? These blokes are from the city. And of course to them, survival's helicopters and takeaway tucker. But you get them out the bush for a bit and take all those resources away and it's a different ball game. They're going to be out here for the next 4 days and they're going to be taught by the experts.
Righto. Listen, I'll just go through a few points, particularly for you blokes who've just arrived here. You're going to be here for the next 4 days, working with these people here. And hopefully what they're going to do is pass across a whole bunch of information and knowledge that you've got no idea about to date. Okay? So keep your eyes open. You're looking for information. If you ask questions, these people here will tell you. They'll give you all the information you want about living in this sort of country.
We gotta go together.
Yeah, right.
We're not separating each other.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take these boys with us.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like that other time.
Yeah,
Same way.
other time.
Mm. Same way. Okay, now, you won't find it too hard. You're not going to starve while you're here. There's plenty of tucker around. These billabongs. The Army needs to know how to survive in Northern Australia, and that's what my job's all about. And I reckon this is the best way to do it. These men are in the Army Reserve. They've spent time in the bush before, but not like this. Not where they have to find their own food. On this survival exercise, they'll have to learn fast about finding good water and living off the land. They'll learn to see things they've never seen before, and going bush will never be quite the same again.
Make some bowl for drink. If you see like this, that's the water in there. Yes.
The trees, bulbs and bottom.
Yeah.
Bulbs.
Yeah.
Is it only this type of tree?
Yeah, like this.
Like this.
Oh,
Yeah. taste it, eh, boys? Yeah.
Nice.
Boys, you have to drink it? That you to it, eh?
Tasmania. Alright. That's okay. Good. Yeah, you got it all right.
Yeah. You got one? Yeah, I got one too. Good.
He's around here.
Working closely with Aboriginals is a new experience for most of these men. They'll have to adapt, and it'll probably take a couple of days for the ice to break. But once things get underway, I'll be leaving them here to learn and fend for themselves.
That? Through there? Yeah, through there. And hang on to the spear. Yeah. That's multi-purpose.
These blokes have got it pretty easy. They're getting handed about 40,000 years of experience. But the first Europeans to come aboard this part of the world, and we're on the western side of Cape York Peninsula, didn't appreciate what the Aboriginals had to offer. In fact, they encountered some very hostile situations. Not like this. A 120 kilometres north of Aurukun is a place called the Pennyfather River. It might seem just like any other river, but this is the point of first European contact with Australia. And it happened long before Captain Cook. As early as 1606, a Dutch explorer called William Jantz just happened to bump into the Australian coastline right here. Just have a look at this. This is 400 years of untouched Australian history, because it was 160 years before Cook got here that Jantz was down this coastline, and absolutely nothing has changed. If you go back to where Cook visited Australia, Botany Bay and Cooktown, it's all different. But here, it's exactly the same. Oh, the sand dunes might move a bit from year to year, but that's about it. We've certainly got no takeaway tucker joints here. But it seems that tucker was the last thing on Jantz's mind. What looks like a tranquil place today turned into a real nightmare for the Dutchmen. They clashed with the local Aboriginals, the Wicmonkin tribe. Several men were killed and Jantz fled. His journal has never been found, but we can be pretty sure that, like all the other European explorers who followed him, he wasn't too impressed with what he saw of Australia. It's pretty understandable, really. Those Dutch sailors came out here looking for wealth, spices and gold, things they are familiar with. This must have looked like landing on the moon. It's fascinating to imagine what could have happened if they'd stayed longer. Could they have survived? Those people who attacked Jantz have been living off the land for thousands of years. Today you can still do it, if you know what you're looking for. You see these? They're cockle shells, and you get them very commonly along this coastline. All you got to do is chuck them on the hot coals and they pop open and you can eat them. They're just like a mussel. In fact, Aboriginals did eat the odd one or two of these. has got to be the residue of the biggest feed in history, because what we've got here are just thousands and thousands of these cockle shells, and they've been collected here over about a 1,000-year period and just chucked up here, because what we've got here is basically the garbage dump. All the way back over there, the mounds continue. And right around this Weeper area in Cape York, there are something like 500 of these cockle shell mounds. Absolutely staggering. And if this is any indication, there should be plenty of tucker to be found round here. I'll be able to use these later on. Tell you something about these. These are a thing called nonda plum, and they're only found on this west coast of Cape York, nowhere else. They formed one of the basic staple food items for Aboriginal people. And they'd fall from these trees, like this one behind me, litter the ground for about 2 or 3 months of the year, and then Aboriginal people collect them up, mash them up, or eat them raw. They've got a very mealy sort of a taste to them. Pretty dry too. I was reading in one book one time, an anthropologist bloke by the name of Thompson, I think, reckoned that these were particularly popular with old toothless Aboriginal women. I can understand why. They're one of the best examples we've got of where Aboriginal people actually preserve food. What they do is dig a hole, collect up the nuts, and then bury them into the hole. They'd cover them up, and that way they'd stay fresh, and they'd come back perhaps 2, 3, 4 weeks later and dig out the hole again. Of course, when you're dealing with bush tucker, things aren't quite that simple all the time. Right here amongst the nonda plums, we've got these little fellas here. They're a little berry called gidgee. Now, if you were to crush one of those up and eat it, there's no doubt about it, you'd die, because they contain a toxin called abrin. Yet, Aboriginal people found a use for even this. The women would pick them out, crush it up and swallow it to bring on an abortion. The trick is, how do you pick the right one? The idea is to drop the abra seeds into water. Most of them will sink, but occasionally one will pop back up onto the surface, floating. And it was those floating ones that they'd chew up and swallow. Now, half the time, they'd not only abort the fetus, they'd also abort themselves. It was an extremely dangerous practice, a bit like Russian roulette. I guess the whole exercise goes to emphasise the fine line between surviving and dying in the bush. Mangroves are not the most comfortable place that you choose to be in. But along this coast, you often have to get through them to get from the sea to the inland. There are mosquitoes, sandflies, and also crocodiles, so I always come prepared. This is not the first place that you'd think of to look for food. But once you get in here and once you start looking, there's just so much to see. It's an untouched, primitive environment, just teeming with life. Like this little fella here, a Queensland mud crab. One of these will certainly give you a good feed. Some of the food's very skillfully camouflaged. This mud mussel is a real mangrove delicacy. It's high in protein and it tastes great. Well worth the effort of a trip into the mangroves. Not only do the animals and the insects give you a hard time in the mangroves, but sometimes the plants do as well. And this is one of those nasty little fellas that you've got to be quite careful of. See that little white sap on there? That's called milky mangrove or blind your eye mangrove. And if you get that in your eye, you'll go blind. However, Aboriginal people, get that out of the way for a minute, found a redeeming feature about this fella. They found that if they put that sap into a stingray sting, it would cure the sting. Of course, to get a stingray, you've got to first get yourself a boat. The traditional way to catch stingray around here is from a canoe. The people here became very skillful at building dugout canoes made from local trees. But of all the trees around here, there was only one type that they used, a very special tree called a bombax. And they're quite rare, not easy to find. This is a real beauty. In fact, Aboriginal people used to prize these trees so much that they used to, here it is here, put a big blaze across the trunk. And that would mean personal ownership of the tree, so that they could later on chop it down and turn it into a canoe. Yeah, get him. Yep. Hey, get him? Yeah. Oh, look at that blue ring, eh? Oh, get him. Whoop. Hey. That's that spine. Oh, blue rings all over him. Oh, yeah. What's that needle? You got two needles, this fella. Yeah.
One missing, second one get.
Yeah, 1, 2. You cook him up? Looks a beauty, doesn't he? Alright, we want to take this in and go and have a go at him, eh? Well, paddle him off that. Yeah, paddle him back to the beach. I told you these things would come in handy. They're a little seed pod off the grevillea. And up here, we call them the bushman's clothes peg. They're quite a neat little item.
suppose you reckon I got a big feed of stingray stew here. Well, there's a bit of a local practice in vogue here, and it says that the bloke who spears the stingray takes it home and eats it. That's fair enough. Us blokes who bail out the boat, we've got to look after ourselves.
I wonder if those army blokes back at the exercise are doing any better. They've been out there for 4 days now.
Yeah, mention.
And you cut all the fish.
I'll remember that.
Should get more wood. Turtle. Yeah. Yeah, but any part you should not eat.
No, this is good to
Eat the whole lot.
Yeah.
What you eat? All of it?
All of this good to
You
eat.
eat anything. Eh? Too much.
Kentucky fried turtle.
Grab it.
Rabbit and
Cut up little bits, everybody.
a little bit,
Yeah.
not grab the whole lot. And hardly.
I've been can't get up. Yeah, that's it.
When a fat part of yours,
Oh, yeah, good.
good.
Chicken.
Chicken.
No, a bit of venison, but chicken.
Little bit, Tony,
No, I taste
Mine,
That's good.
tastes better. That's all right. I use this to get the soup.
You're
Yeah.
gonna cut it after. File snake.
Pass him round.
Bones, lots of bones.
Yeah, eat the bones, eh?
You eat them then? Eat the bones?
Don't chew bones.
I chew them.
You can chew them up?
No, what? Not the time. I can in and wonder.
You want a fair few of them to make a feed, wouldn't you?
Or is that bit of
You
almond?
want a lot of them, eh?
That's almond. Almond, so I don't need that, eh?
Good lunch, eh?
I want them.
Sergeant the Nondaka.
Good. Good and chewy.
I young is you.
It's like a fishy sort of chook taste, isn't it?
Chucky.
Now tell us, fair dinkum, what are your attitude about Aboriginals now that you've been mixing with this type of situation for a couple of days, compared with what you had before you got here?
Yeah, different.
Different.
Well, just that, there's so much more. So they've got the culture up here, they don't seem to be... They've got, they can teach us things, which is amazing. Normally you don't think of that.
Yeah.
And they've got such a rich culture too, and it goes back so far. And they hang on to that, but they also, these guys play guitar in a rock band as well.
Yeah.
But he takes both, so that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much different attitude than you get just looking in the cities.
Yeah. What about the area here? Do you feel a bit more confident in this sort of environment now?
Oh, much, yeah. Yeah, especially the water tree.
Yeah.
Or getting the water out of the tree, I feel a hell of a lot more confident than what I would if I stuck out here for a couple of months.
Yeah.
Yeah, much more, yeah.
We have a bit of a throw around spears yesterday afternoon, and young fellas were having a go. Then old James got up, one hand, give it a bit of a shake, and straight as a die.
It's pretty good though, really right on it. So obviously they've been learning off their parents and their grandparents too.
Yeah.
Which is really good.
Skills and their history. Like they were telling us about all the storybooks they got, and they've got a dictionary written in their own language and everything. They're really proud of that, which amazed me.
Yeah.
That actually, embrace the culture, not only just look at it as something we've got to learn, like we would.
Yeah.
I hope to see you down at Aurukun sometime. You come down?
Yeah.
See you back in.
Yeah.
Just put everything there.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you in Cairns.
Yeah.
Do your recruit course with us. All right. Take you around. Peter?
Yeah.
Sim in? Thanks for helping us all those things.
You to the fisherman?
Yeah, man.
From Tiffany.
Fantastic.
Do you think you're enjoying
We'll come to Aurukun sometime.
Yeah.
I'll probably
Thanks for
A lot of Aboriginal people have lost their culture and their traditional background, but that's not the case with these Aurukun people. These Aurukun people, interestingly enough, are the same people, the Wick Monken group, that gave old Gent such a hard time up there on the Pennyfather River. Fortunately for us, times have changed.